displaying the glory of God's creation by exploring America one park at a time. Welcome to Parking Full Time with Big Dave, the park's professor. 10th hole. The par and the distance are at the top of the screen. Most holes on this course have a back tee and a front tee, and this hole plays very differently depending on whether you're playing from the back tee or from the front tee. In the distance I gave you up the top, the 395, that's the distance from the back tee. The 250 is the distance from the front tee. From the back tee, this hole is a long and sharp dogleg left that plays steeply uphill. And all of these video clips I'm showing you here start from the back tees. From the front tee, this hole is more straightforward, and it still plays uphill, but there's no dogleg to deal with. This is a very interesting hole and very challenging hole if you're playing from the back tee. There's the basket, and there's the view back down the fairway from behind the basket. The 11th hole is the longest hole on this course. It plays moderately downhill here at the beginning, and the first part of this hole plays down what appears to be a pipeline corridor, or maybe a sewer line corridor or water line corridor. It's a fairly wide corridor, and therefore it's a pretty generous fairway on this hole. But if you get out of the corridor and into the woods on either side, those are very dense woods, and it is going to be a tough recovery throw from either side of this fairway. I do want to welcome you back to Parking Full Time. I am Big Dave, the parks professor. We are at Shoally Creek Disc Golf Course. We are in Boiling Springs, South Carolina, and so we're on the north side of the Spartanburg metro area. Now on this hole, when you get down here to the creek, something interesting happens. So most holes would play across the creek or something like that. This hole doesn't. This hole actually doglegs sharply to the left, and the second part of this hole then plays along the creek, so the creek is to the right here, to get back to the basket. Very interesting hole and very memorable and challenging hole. Maybe the signature hole on this course, although there are several holes that you could say that about. You'll also notice that there's a walking trail here, and I did see several people on these walking trails when I came here and played here. So you do have to watch for pedestrians when you throw, because there are several walking trails that play along several holes on this course. 12th hole is across the creek from the 11th hole, and there was an error on the course map posted back near the parking area when I played here. The course map showed the basket and tee for this hole in the opposite places, and therefore it showed this hole playing the opposite direction that it actually does. This hole plays the opposite direction as the previous hole, and in fact it's the 11th fairway you can see across the creek there to the right. This hole is a very tight hole considering how long it is. There are a lot of small trees here, and there's also the creek in play. That creek here on the back nine kind of becomes our nemesis. We're going to see a lot of that little creek here on the back nine. Here's the basket up here. You see the basket is surrounded by a bunch of small and medium-sized trees. This is another very challenging and very tight hole. 13th hole breaks back out into the open, and this is the first fairly open hole that we've had since the 2nd hole. There is a fairly low canopy here from some overhanging limbs, and so you have to either shape your disc strongly from left or right with a big arc, or keep your disc low. Personally, I chose to keep my disc low when I played this hole. Those are the tennis courts, by the way, off to the left. The basket is off here into the edge of the pine planting here to the right. And so even though this is a fairly open hole, you still have to thread your disc through some tight trees to get to the basket here. This hole's a nice change of pace from the holes immediately before it. I like this hole too. The 14th hole is another of this course's signature hole. It requires a forced carry over a stormwater collection basin, which you see off to the left, and we're going to walk up to the edge to here in a minute. And then we'll jump over the basin, and once we do that, we're basically right up to the basket. The basket on this hole is placed just a few feet over the basin, but there's also a sharp drop-off behind the basket. It requires good distance control to get anywhere close to this basket with an approach throw over the basin. I'll also mention on the 14th hole, the previous hole, there's an alternate red basket that's located about 100 feet past the basket that I showed you. All of these video clips, I'm going from the long back tee to the yellow main basket. Hole number 15 is the last of the really tight and heavily wooded holes. You can see our Nemesis Creek is back here on the left. That creek actually isn't so bad. It's shallow enough that if you throw it there, it's going to be a tough recovery throw, but you're probably not going to lose your disc because the water is sufficiently shallow. Now, there's also a cluster of trees here directly in front of the basket, and so you have to decide, do you challenge the creek and go around to the left of those trees, or do you play it safer and stay to the right of the trees? That makes for an interesting decision on this hole. The 16th hole plays across our Nemesis, and there's this really nice bridge here that I'm using to get myself across. This hole is more open than the previous holes. There's the creek and a densely wooded area off to the right, but there's plenty of room out here to the left. This hole is a gradual dogleg to the right, and so it makes full use of the creek and the trees over here to the right as obstacles. That break in the video, by the way, was because another user, a guy walking his dog, was up by the basket, and I didn't want to capture him on video. I did capture this video on Tuesday, October the 10th, and it was a warm, sunny day in the upper 70s when I came here. There's the 16th basket and the view back down towards the tee. The 17th hole is the other hole that requires a forced carry over a stormwater collection basin, in addition to number 14. That basin is out of bounds regardless of whether there's any water in it, which there wasn't when I came here. And if you notice in that basin, there is some dense greenery down there in that basin. So if you throw a disc into one of these collection basins, very high probability that's going to be a lost disc. The basket is up here to the right, and we see our Nemesis Creek for one final time, which is just off to the right down that collection of stones there from the basket. This is quite a challenging hole, especially from the back tee, and it's quite challenging even though it's fairly open. The 18th hole is the second longest hole on this course from the back tees. You can see the stormwater collection basin that we had to throw over on the previous hole is off there to the left, but this hole is a sharp dogleg right, and it doglegs to the right here and heads through this little tunnel corridor through the trees to get up here to the basket. This is a very long and challenging hole. If you're coming to the last hole needing a birdie to salvage a good score, it's going to be a real challenge on this hole. Since this is the last hole, I do want to thank you for watching. Parking full time would not be anything without the people who watch. I realize that every day, and I thank you every day. Also, I do not take any monetary compensation for anything that I do for this project, including any of the videos that I produce. And therefore, all I get for doing these videos are your likes, your subscribes, your comments, and your views. And I do appreciate all of those things. Here's the basket up here. I think this is a fantastic course. This is one of my favorite courses in upstate South Carolina. This one and Grand Central Station are probably two of my favorites. It's a very challenging course, especially from the back tee, but it's a good challenge. It's a very enjoyable challenge. That is the end of the course. Have a great afternoon. Take care, and Lord bless.